Um, so the weather's awful again. It's wet, it's cold, it's just foggy. It's not raining or anything, but it's just like misty, just gross, wet, cold weather, right? Um, it's not ideal for trying to build a piece of furniture out of wood. So I thought, what a better day than sit here, drink coffee, and mess with some leather. So today I've got a Kimber 1911 that a customer has asked for a better holster for. So he's got a little sleeve, like a little concealment sleeve that he typically uses, but this is what he had, right? That's for a much smaller frame weapon than a full-size 1911. This gun is relatively heavy. This is relatively lightweight leather. You know, it's not cheap leather by any means. It's good leather. It's just lightweight. You know, this is for like a subcompact or, you know, something smaller. You can kind of see, well, I think he carried it on his right hip, so you can kind of see the way it was worn, probably just the way it fell in the holster naturally. It kind of sat like that, right? So I'll show you when he had it on his hip, the way it was worn, it kind of sat cocked back a little bit, right? Just my personal opinion, the weapon should be vertical when you're wearing it on a holster. Reason being is you're already wearing it really high on your hip. So to draw this weapon, you'd have to come straight out with it, right? If this weapon in a belt in a small holster like this is cocked back like that, over time this leather is going to mold to that gun. And when you've got it on a belt and your belt is tight against your hip, in order to get this gun out, you're going to have to come forward. That's very unnatural, right? That's not a natural movement to draw a weapon, especially a big weapon like this, a full-size gun, right? So unless you're wearing it down here, right, no big deal. You could draw it out, no problem. But he wears it on his hip, on a belt, and to have it cocked just isn't ideal. Sometimes if your holster's not molded, if it's not made right, if it's not the correct fit for that gun, it's not going to sit properly in the leather, right? Leather's going to mold to wherever it sits, right? Or to whatever's sitting in it, especially something as heavy as a full-size 1911. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make him a new one that fits this gun, and that is properly molded to this weapon, right? And rather than having it cocked back, I'm going to make it to where, you know, it sits straight on its hip. That's the way it should be. You know, he carries this. I don't know that he carries it all the time, but you know, if you're gonna carry this, the idea is to carry it for personal protection, right? So you want it readily available. You don't want to have to fight to get it out of your. You don't want to have to fight to get it out of your holster. There's no point at that point. You know what I mean? When your life is threatened, I guess seconds matter, right? It should fit nicely. It should be molded. You should be able to draw it properly, and that's what we're gonna try to, give him today. So that's just my personal opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's other people that would argue that fact, and maybe it should be cocked back a little bit. I disagree wholeheartedly, though. But that's the great thing about America. We get our own opinions around here, right? Right to free will and all that stuff. So that's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. If you guys have followed me at all, you've heard me talk about my love for art. You've heard my wife talk about my love for art. And you've heard me talk about what art is, in my opinion, right? Art's a vision. It all starts with a vision. Something you've seen in the past, something you dreamed about in the past. So I am going to start by putting it on paper, right? It's really difficult to just whip something out of thin air, right? At least for me it is. I like to put it on paper. So I'll start, lay the gun down on a piece of paper, and I'm just going to draw the basic outline of the gun. Just going to trace it. Just so I have the basic outline, so when I'm cutting patterns I can at least fit it to the basic outline of the gun. I'm not looking to make this right here perfect, just quick outline so I know how it's going to fit and where I might need to mold it or where I need to extend the flap or whatever. So I'll show you in just a second. This isn't anything spectacular. It's just a very quick and basic outline of the gun. So there you go. Very quick basic outline of the gun. Then I can take the pattern, place it on there, and kind of play with it where I want it, where I want the folds, where I want the holes for the belt loops. Do I want it up like that? Do I want it down like that? Do I want to mold it up higher? So we'll just play with it like that. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that out, draw a couple patterns, and then see what you guys think. All right, so I've made a couple sketches. Well, not a couple, just one. Anyhow, so let me show you guys what I've got so far. Sorry, I kind of made a couple stray lines on here, and I'm a little bit compulsive. So, all right, so this is what I've come up with. This is what he had. Right, relatively ineffective, cheap, just flap of leather. Right, these are good for something like a 380. But when you're talking about a full-size 1911, just relatively ineffective. It's too small. The leather's too light. When you're carrying a heavy full-size gun like a 1911, you're going to be unhappy with this. You're not going to enjoy wearing this. It's going to be uncomfortable. The gun is going to want to fold out on you. Take my word for it. Buy this for something small. If you're wanting to use this as a concealed holster for a full-size weapon, you're going to be disappointed. I know that these are $12, but it's not money well spent, I promise. So this is, oh man, I messed up my sketchbook. Anyhow, so this is what I've come up with so far. You can see the difference, right? So this, let me kind of point out a few things. Like I said, the idea is to get the gun to stand straight up, not cocked back. This is an unnatural thing. To try to pull it out forward and then draw it, it's too slow. So this will stand straight up in here. So what I've got is what the customer was looking for. If you look at this one, forget about what I've drawn. Look at the gun that I've traced out, right? This is how this one sat, right? So like I said, it ended up making the gun cock back a little bit, right? So what he requested was a holster that was simple, lightweight, nothing too crazy, nothing too big and bulky. It's just it's for concealment, right? So what he wanted was something that would encompass a higher ratio on top of the on the top portion of this gun, right? So that's what I did. I brought the leather up, and then I can't bring it all the way back because then you won't be able to insert your hand into the holster, right? So bring it down, and if you look closely, this is a dotted line, right? So that dotted line shows that it's behind the handle, the hand grip of the gun, right? So this is on the outside. It'll fold under and then come behind the handle, right? And then it'll stitch down. If you notice, this is I've separated the belt loops, right? So this will be a cut in the leather, both of these, and then it'll be stitched to like a backer, right? Like just a real lightweight leather, something real light, bends easy, but will protect his jeans, will protect his gun, right? So this right here, where it comes up, a lot of people always say, well, you know, that's gonna hinder the operation, right? You're not gonna be able to get the gun into the holster effectively. You're not gonna be able to draw it effectively. So you will, and I'm gonna argue this point just like I always do. It'll come up high on the front, right? Where it dips back and comes back behind the hand grip. This will all be stitched. So essentially, you're gonna have stitch marks, right? So this will all be stitched to the backer that this is all stitched to, right? It'll be stitched down here, and then this portion right here will be left open. And the reason this is left open is to allow the gun to slip in. This is stitched to allow this back piece to lay flat against the backer, right? So it'll be flat against the backer here. This pocket will be open for the gun to insert into. So I brought it down pretty low, not terribly low. Again, he didn't want anything too big, bulky, and heavy. So I just just to protect the trigger, right? You don't want anyone bumping the trigger. You damn sure don't want yourself bumping the trigger. That would be incredibly embarrassing if you shot yourself in the leg. So, you know, I think I captured what he was looking for, was to just cover more of the gun, right? The muzzle will be exposed, and then, you know, the hammer will be exposed. But for the most part, the important stuff is covered and protected, right? So this is where I'm at so far, and I think I'm going to go ahead and start cutting out or tracing this onto a piece of leather, and we'll cut it out and see what the pattern looks like in real life. All right. So, people always tell me, why do I look like I'm sitting behind such a big desk? I'm kind of a tall person. So typically, if I were to sit in a normal sized chair, the tabletop is most of the time too low for me to be comfortable. I like to be close to my work. Right. My workbenches are the same way. It just helps me get a little closer to my work. I like to relax. I like to be real close to it when I'm working, and it's just my personal preference. So if you're wondering why I look so small behind my desk, that's why. So I got my leather, right? What I've done is I just cased it with water. Just got it wet. So it kind of darkens up when you do that. I'm going to let it turn back to its natural color. ish. I don't want it to dry completely, but just kind of let it soak some of that water up, and that moisture will kind of get down into the grains a little bit. I do this before I trace a pattern onto a piece of leather. So I'm just going to use a stylus, just smooth point, a little ball on the end. I'll take my pattern, I'm just going to lay it on that leather and trace it. Pretty simple. You got to be careful not to move it when you're doing this. If you move it, it's really difficult to get it lined back up where you were. So when you do this, some people, I'll do that right now actually. Some people like to fold it under. Some people tape it, some people even glue it. I don't go to those lengths. I can hold it pretty still most of the time. So you just want to make sure that it stays in the same spot, but pretty simple. You're just gonna trace the lines, and it'll transfer over to the leather. Just kind of makes it easy to draw something on paper, and then transfer it over, because otherwise you end up wasting a lot of leather because your pattern didn't turn out the way you wanted it, or whatever reason. I don't like to waste leather. Leather's kind of expensive, and I like to, most of the time I'll make a lot of changes before I decide on a final design or whatever. So putting it on paper first allows me to erase it, you know what I mean? That, and you can, if you end up with a pattern that you really like, if you put it on paper, then you have it for a later time if you want to make another one or whatever. And I do get that sometimes. People see something I made and then, can you make me one? So just saves time if you've already got a pattern, When you're tracing this, some people take forever to trace it. You don't really have to do that. I mean, get it as close as you can. But once you've got your pattern cut out of the leather, you can sand the edges to dress them up or to fine tune, So I've been asked before, how'd you get into the leather working thing? It was just something I wanted to do, honestly. Something I've always kind of liked. I've always been envious of people that did it, So I'm going to trace out the main body of this holster. I'm going to leave the belt loops for later. I'll cut those out later. But I wanted to show you guys real quick how it transferred over. Right, you can kind of see how it transferred over. It just kind of darkens up. It'll leave a little line. And then what you can do is I use depending on how many curves I have, I use just a box cutter, just a carpenter's knife, just one of those disposable, you can break them off, razor blades. It works pretty good. They're super sharp, super thin, so they cut through leather pretty easily. For something with a little bit more detail, where I'm going to be making a lot of curve cuts and things like that, or real kind of fine cuts, I use X-Acto knives. You can get X-Acto knives with different blades and different shapes, and you know, you can see the difference, you know. So I'll use X-Acto knives if I need to make a lot of detailed cuts. Anyways, not really important, I guess. So, actually, I am going to use my X-Acto knife. And then I've got a big one for cutting out like big basic patterns, you know. This is just a big sturdy knife. You can buy these replacement blades at most hardware stores or hobby shops too. So if you dull one, I tend to cut on granite a lot of times. So like a granite countertop, so it'll mess up my edges pretty quick. So I try, which I'm going to do today, I try to cut on a piece of leather. That way the knife has somewhere, like some sort of relief, you know, so you're not just digging your knife into your into something like a granite countertop, you know. And then so we'll just cut it out, you know. Just go slow with it, because you only get one chance, unless you just like wasting leather. And again, when you're cutting this out, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. You know, get it as perfect as you can. But understand that sandpaper goes a long ways. You know, here's a piece of rough cut leather. You know, you can just take some sandpaper and clean up the edges, you know, and it'll smooth it pretty good, you know. So don't worry so much about the cuts, you know. Like I said, make them as perfect as you can, but within reason, because, you know, you could spend all day trying to cut a pattern out if you just were overly detailed with your cuts, you know. The most important thing is smooth curves, right? You don't want real choppy curves. I hate when I see real choppy curves on something. It just doesn't flow good. It's hard to clean up, you know. But anyways, a lot of that stuff will be, like I said, will be taken care of with sandpaper and beveling tools and everything else. So the finishing details on a leather project are, you know, it's kind of like doing the trim work on a house when you're remodeling a house, you know. The basic carpentry is a huge part of building something, but wow, I never even knew I had that one. Where'd that come from, I wonder? It's like a bigger stylus. I have no idea where that came from. I don't remember getting that one. Anyway, so like I was saying, the finishing touches, you know, like this is a very rough cut piece of leather, right? You can see it's kind of choppy here. That curve isn't real smooth. That's kind of what I was talking about. It's, you know, this one's a little more smooth, and you can fix a lot of that stuff with sandpaper. And then how the edges are pretty square like that, you can go through and bevel all that stuff. Yeah, with a beveler, you can just go through and bevel all those edges. And once you do that, you can sand that down, and you can kind of see it just rounds off the edges. And once you sand that down and burnish all that, turns out really nice, really pretty. So I'm gonna finish cutting this out, and I'll get back to you. Hey y'all, all right, so I've got the pattern cut out, started stamping it, just doing some simple patterns on it, nothing crazy. Right now I'm using a beveling tool, just to bevel the edges on the C. And I'm not gonna lie, I kind of forgot about the video. Kind of got into the groove of working here, so thought I would just film a little bit while I was working on the beveling. This can be somewhat of a tedious process. Getting the feel right, you know, getting the feel of the hammers or the mallets, whatever you want to call them, getting the feel of the tools in your fingers. So I'll kind of show you. You can see the difference. This isn't beveled yet. These are. And the idea is to kind of draw that image out, right? Whatever your pattern's going to be, it's just to kind of make it look somewhat three-dimensional. Draw the pattern out a little bit, right? So that's all we're doing when we do this, just to give it a little bit of depth. You know, nobody likes a boring picture, so kind of do this to give it a little bit of depth and three-dimensional look and a little bit of character. This isn't going to be an overly extravagant design. I'm just putting this in here for the last name of the customer. But let's see if I can finish this up real quick, and you guys can kind of see somewhat what I'm talking about. So when I'm doing stuff like this, I don't like to see tool marks, if that makes sense. I want it to look like it flows evenly. I don't want it to appear like it's been tapped on with a mallet. You know what I mean? I want it to kind of flow somewhat smooth and fluid. This isn't a traditional mallet that a lot of people use in leatherworking. I like it better because it's smaller. I like the aluminum handle. I like the feel of this hammer better than a lot of the different mallets that you'll find at like leather shops and stuff. I don't know. I got this from a woodworking shop. It's for like wood chisels and things. It works, you know. I like it. I like the way it feels. I like the weight, you know. Seems to work okay for me. To each their own, I guess. So let me do the circle real quick. Let's see. I usually have music on, so it's not so monotone and just tapping on leather. For the video purpose, I wanted it to be somewhat quiet, so I could talk. It's funny when I sit out here and I do this. So I'm in my garage. It's funny when I sit out here and do this, I can hear all the neighbor dogs start barking like somebody's knocking on the door. I'm sure the neighbors love that. They're like, what the hell are you barking at? So this is one of those things that takes a fair amount of patience. I think that's where a lot of people fail when it comes to stuff like this, is they just don't have the patience for it. They get bored. They don't want to do it. It takes too long. But once it's complete, it's pretty cool looking, you know. It's not so plain. You can kind of see it's beveled a little bit. It kind of looks three-dimensional. And we can dress that up. We can do some more patterns and kind of make it stand out a little bit more, so it's not just a C sitting there, you know. We can dress this up a lot more. So I'm going to stare at it for a minute and figure out what else I'm going to put in there. See if I can dress it up a little bit more than just that. So maybe I can texture it or something. So, all right. See you guys in a bit.